In 2007, Apple revolutionized the smartphone industry. The announcement of the iPhone in January took the tech world by storm, and on launch day 5 months later, thousands of people lined up at both Apple and AT&T stores across the country to be one of the first to get the phone. Some had even spent the night. It was clear that people were excited about the iPhone. And for a device that was radically different from any other phone on the market at that point, why wouldn't they be? Now, whether you're an Apple fanboy or a hater, you can't ignore the impact that the first iPhone had on the smartphone industry. But while practically everybody knows about the iPhone today, did you know that it technically wasn't Apple's first phone project? That's because back in 2005, there was another mobile phone that Apple was working on. And no, I'm not talking about some sort of prototype or anything like that. This was a real product that was manufactured by Motorola. It's known as the iTunes phone. And if you've never heard of it, there's a good reason for that. Let's get into it. Back in September of 2005, Steve Jobs, on stage at Apple's annual music event, announced the very first iTunes phone, officially known as the Motorola Rocker E1. This phone was essentially a rebranded version of another Motorola phone, the E398, with the addition of an Apple-designed iTunes client, which essentially gave the phone iPod-like capabilities. You could plug this phone into your Mac or Windows-based PC, and it would be recognized by iTunes. This enabled you to sync music from your iTunes library with the phone just like an iPod. Now, this was the very first time that Apple's iTunes technology was integrated into a phone. But was it the phone that Apple was rumored to be working on? You see, there had been rumors for years about Apple possibly making a cell phone, even all the way back to 1999 when the company purchased the domain name iPhone.org. Ever since then, the rumor mill was churning, posting articles and even mock-ups, all speculating what an Apple phone would look like. This would go on as Apple quietly registered for ownership of the iPhone trademark in various countries over the next few years, beginning with Singapore in 2002. But it wouldn't be until July of 2004 when Apple and Motorola announced in a press release that they were working on creating a phone with an integrated iTunes player. So this was it, right? This was what the blogs and news articles and mock-ups were all pointing to, right? An Apple phone. Well, you see, the iTunes phone was not created exclusively by Apple. It was more of a partnership. The phone itself was just a regular Motorola phone with some Apple-designed software on it that worked with iTunes. And sure, it was cool to have iTunes on a phone for the very first time, but judging from the reaction of the crowd that day, they didn't appear very excited about the whole thing, especially when you compare it to the reaction seen at the iPhone's announcement at Macworld 2007.
There's one more thing about iTunes that we're announcing today. You've probably heard about this. Today, we are introducing the iTunes phone. These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone.
It also didn't help that images of the Rocker E1 running the iTunes player were leaked to Engadget 2 months prior to the launch. Okay, but even with all that aside, iPods were flying off the shelves, and iTunes was the way to purchase songs digitally. So you would think that a device that combined the music playing functionality of the iPod and the massive music library offered on the iTunes Store with a cell phone would do the same. But this wasn't the case. The Rocker instead launched to a rather lukewarm reception. Even though you could use the phone just like an iPod by connecting it to your computer to sync with iTunes, it still wasn't exactly the same experience. Because it lacked support for USB 2.0, transfer times were much slower, and the phone was also limited as to how many songs could be on the device at one time. Its firmware only allowed the iTunes player to store 100 songs, or 1/10 the amount of songs able to fit on a 4GB iPod. This was despite the fact that the rocker had a micro SD card slot for expansion. Not only that, the phone used a 2.5mm headphone jack, meaning that headphones using the more popular 3.5mm standard would have to use an adapter. Apple would almost get this right with the first iPhone, as they did include a 3.5mm headphone jack, but it was recessed. Meaning that, you're gonna love this, headphones that had larger ends would need an adapter to fit in the iPhone. Some also criticized the design of the rocker, as it was very similar to the E398, aside from the addition of an extra button on the phone's keypad to launch right into the iTunes player at any time. The Motorola rocker was priced at $249.99 on contract with Singular. Singular was another important partner in the creation of the iTunes phone, as they were the exclusive carrier. On the day of the phone's announcement, they showcased a huge iTunes Plus Singular advertising campaign with both print and video ads to promote the device. Now, the iTunes phone deal didn't last very long, but there was actually another Motorola phone released with the iTunes player. The lesser-known Motorola Sliver L7 came out in late 2006, about 1 year after the rocker, and is the device that I have here. The Sliver has a special boot-up animation unique from all of the other Singular Motorola phones. The regular Motorola interface is similar to what you'll find on a Razr, with the exception of the iTunes application. Unlike the rocker, the Sliver does not have a dedicated button to launch the player, but there are two customizable buttons on the phone's keypad which can be configured to open the iTunes player. Although the ability to customize these buttons is a standard feature on other Motorola phones like the Razr. So how does the iTunes player itself look? Well, the answer is very similar to an iPod. You have the same menu options and even the same sliding animation when navigating between the menus. Obviously, there's no click wheel, so you have to use the phone's arrow keys to move around. And there's even an option to shuffle songs right from the main screen. It was this reason that Apple positioned the rocker as being similar to the iPod Shuffle, since both held about 100 songs and didn't have a click wheel. So you could say that the iTunes phone was like an iPod Shuffle with a screen, but this still didn't make the device sell any better. In fact, it appears that even people inside Apple were unimpressed with the rocker. This led some to speculate that Apple's work on the rocker was intentionally below par, a claim that father of the iPod Tony Fadell disputed by saying, "No, it was not deliberately made poor, not at all. We tried our best. Motorola would only do so much with it. Their software team was only so good. Their operations system was only so good. And that experience just didn't work very well. It was a clash of all kinds of problems. It wasn't a case of trying to not make it good." But when it came to the song limit, Motorola claims that it was Apple who insisted on this limitation, saying in a 2005 Engadget article that the company originally insisted on a 25 song limit due to licensing issues, but that later on the two companies agreed on 100 songs. When asked about this, Motorola's CEO simply said, "Ask Apple." And even Steve Jobs himself didn't appear to be very excited about the whole thing.
Hello?
Hey, Steve, this is Eddie.
Hi, Eddie. Hey, I'm kind of in the middle of something right now.
Okay, give me a call back later.
Yeah, I'll talk to you later. Thanks. Bye. So I go there and I just resume my music right back to where it was. Well, I was supposed to resume my music right back to where it was.
So you might ask yourself, if people inside Apple weren't so enthusiastic about the rocker, then why did they agree to partner with Motorola to release it? Well, you see, a couple years before the iTunes phone came out, mobile phones were beginning to gain the ability to play MP3s, and Apple saw this as a possible threat to the iPod. With the iTunes phone, people could get the best of both worlds, an iPod inside of a cell phone. Plus, with the 100 song limit, it was seen as a way to introduce people to the world of iPods by giving them a small taste of the full experience. But there was also another reason. You see, Apple was not only partnering up with Motorola, but with Singular as well. And having a good relationship with a carrier would help to solve one of the inevitable problems that Apple faced when they would go on to create the iPhone, and that is control over the device. Steve Jobs detailed this well at All Things Digital 2005 when he stated, "The carriers now have gained the upper hand in terms of the power in the relationship with the handset manufacturers, and they're starting to tell the handset manufacturers what to build. And if Nokia and Motorola don't listen to them, well, Samsung and LG will." So the handset manufacturers are really getting these big, thick books from the carriers telling them, here's what your phone's going to be, and we're not good at that. I personally don't think Apple would have been so enthusiastic about having to slap a giant Singular or Verizon logo on the back of the iPhone and have carrier-bundled applications and branding throughout. But through the Motorola Rocker, Apple was able to develop a relationship with Singular, a relationship that would become vital when Apple was developing the iPhone. And this is where Singular was smart. Apple reportedly tried to come to a deal with Verizon initially, but could not reach an agreement. Singular was able to give Apple control over the design of the phone itself in exchange for one thing: exclusivity. This is another way that the iPhone was such a unique phone at the time. The only real indication that the device even ran on the Singular network was from the subtle text in the status bar. There was no carrier branding on the back of the phone, and applications like the Singular Mall were not included with the iPhone. But Singular was willing to give Apple the control that they wanted. Stan Sigman, Singular's CEO at the time, was present at the iPhone's launch and stated, "Singular entered into a contractual agreement with Apple without ever seeing the iPhone. And that was because of the confidence that I have in Steve and his leadership team to deliver on the vision that they have." Apple, being the secretive company that they are, did not allow Singular to even see a working prototype of the iPhone until a few weeks before the device's launch in January 2007. It was a huge risk for the carrier, but it paid off big time. Because Singular, who would later be acquired by the new AT&T, was the exclusive carrier of the iPhone for 5 years until the launch of the Verizon iPhone 4 in 2011. The Apple-Singular partnership also led to another big innovation: visual voicemail. The ability to select voicemails from a list rather than having to listen to each one in order. As for Motorola, well, you might say they got the short end of the stick. As I mentioned, the iTunes phone didn't sell very well, and could be partly due to the fact that Apple launched the much more successful iPod Nano on the very same day. Motorola's CEO at the time, Ed Zander, later criticized the Nano by saying, "Screw the Nano, what does the Nano do? Who listens to 1,000 songs? People are going to want devices that do more than just play music, something that can be seen in many other countries with more advanced mobile phone networks and savvy users." But the funny thing is, he was right. I mean, how many of you carry around an iPod with you today? In fact, even having songs stored on your phone isn't enough, as now music listeners have turned to subscription streaming services, which made up almost 80% of all music revenue last year. So while the iTunes phone wasn't the amazingly innovative phone that was anticipated to come from Apple, it is still a very important device. A device created through a unique partnership between 3 companies: a cell phone manufacturer, a wireless carrier, and a computer company. And while it didn't fly off the shelves when it launched back in 2005, it serves as an important chapter in the history of the iPhone. So that's all for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed this retrospective look back at the short-lived line of iTunes phones. If you did, be sure to give this video a like and get subscribed. And hey, if you actually used the Motorola Rocker or the Sliver years ago, be sure to share your experience down in the comments. And as always, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.